The Meuse project in Venice. During the 20th century, Venice subsided 23 centimetres. In '66, freak weather conditions around northeast Italy and the Adriatic Sea caused a record high tide in the Venetian lagoon of 194 centimetres. Venice suffered grievously. St. Mark's Plaza was submerged and the city's delicate architecture was extensively structurally damaged. The State Ministry of Public Works declared that safeguarding the city against future and increasing flood dangers was of national priority. A competition was opened to design flood and sea defences for the ancient city. The new Venice Consortium proposed a vast and intricate master plan, the REA. The entry was accepted and began work the same year in 2003. The Meuse project is a major part of this master plan. It consists of a submerged fence of 78 mobile and floatable gates that will isolate the Venetian lagoon from the Adriatic Sea, the high tides and the accompanying flood risks. The Meuse project will be implemented at the Lido Inlet, the Malamocco and the Chioggia inlets of the barrier island that buffers the worst of the tidal power. The gates will be activated once the tide rises above 1 metre, although it is designed to handle tides of up to 3 metres, which accommodates the worst case scenario over the next 100 years. The sea is expected to rise anywhere between 18 and 59 centimetres in the next 100 years. Various controversy surrounds the project. The seabed of the lagoon must be flattened to construct the submerged gate housing, disturbing the delicate ecosystem of the lagoon. And the cost to the Italian state is immense. The Meuse project costs around €4.7 billion. There have currently been 9 unsuccessful appeals against the project, and various alternatives have been rejected. And as of 2014, the Meuse project is 80% complete and targeted for completion in 2016.
Floating Farms, Botanic, is a project that combines existing technologies in a new solution to cultivate food within this inner city. The project starts from a simple concept, a greenhouse. Davey O'Sullivan had the idea of using old tourist boats as floating greenhouses, substituting passengers for food. These greenhouses would take fresh food directly to the consumer using the canals of the city. The boat would be irrigated and powered by natural means. The rainwater is collected and stored with filtered canal water. Then it's used to water the plants. Also, the heat from the sun is captured during the day and released at night when the temperatures are low. Using this type of system, it's possible to reduce the environmental impact of producing food.
Our group's first text was The Beach of Fantasy, which is an extract from Walter Benjamin's Growth by Michael Taussig. In the text, Taussig investigates Charles Orson's idea that the history of the world can be narrated by the sea. Taussig discusses and explains the various identities of the sea and mankind's ever-changing relationship with it, and their transitional platform into the sea, the beach. Taussig utilises various texts, stories, and experiences that allocate the sea 3 main distinguishable identities. The first identity is the sea as an adversary. In this identity, the sea is a perilous context, where a person can test themselves free from safety nets, and solely reliant on their personal character, prowess, and perseverance. Gods evoke storms and carnage on sailors, monsters and mermaids tantalise them with treacherous powers, and only the hardest, bravest, and most cunning heroes navigate and survive such a voyage. Taussig talks about Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The hero Ulysses, or sometimes Odysseus, king of Ithaca, is the subject of the Odyssey. He formed a key part of Agamemnon's fleet to rescue Helen at Troy. Ulysses is credited with the Trojan horse plot. He also found and convinced Achilles to join the war in the first place, and then rescued the slain hero's body from intense close combat fighting. On the epic decade-long voyage home from Troy, Ulysses encountered sirens, cyclopses, was shipwrecked twice and enchanted for 7 years by Calypso, before finally returning home triumphant to Ithaca. He is the epitome of a character able to survive the sea in its identity as an adversary. The second identity of the sea is a sea of profit. Taussig refers to Conrad's Heart of Darkness. The book follows a sailor representing a great trading company exploiting various newly discovered colonies. The various Atlantic trade routes are teeming with merchant vessels and pirates. Amsterdam became the global trade centre with its integrated system of canals allowing easy loading, transit and unloading of cargo. The RMS Titanic famously underloaded its lifeboats, due to the command's confidence that a nearby ship would reach them before Titanic sank. The sea and all its opportunities captivated the public and was at the forefront of the media. Blackpool in the UK was flooded with workers seeking sea therapy during Wake Week's holidays, and coastal tourism underwent huge investments. It was a sea of profit. The third identity that Taussig outlines is the sea as a backdrop. The Australian beaches that Taussig grew up on were once home to the working classes, the harbours docking only a handful of lovingly handcrafted boats. In later years, after piracy and war had faded away, coastal property values skyrocketed and millionaires fought for harbour views. And the harbours themselves were filled with commercial yuppie yachts as opposed to the handcrafted boats in the earlier years. The intensely commoditised modern world relies on a vast cargo shipping industry, yet the general public have little to no idea of how the industry functions. Taussig calls it invisible, a backdrop. The sea and beaches are no longer understood and respected as at the time of Ulysses, and the majority of people see them as a backdrop to social and leisure contexts. However, among the millionaire yachts are a population of Vietnamese fishermen. The two socially divided lifestyles concurrently proceed. They show a selection of the many interchangeable preconceptions and identity of the beach and the sea. Taussig explains these identities are so many in number, intertwined and varied, that the beach has lost any real defined or tangible identity, and has become instead a fantasy. Of course, the sea defences that are implemented in Amsterdam and Venice may be the forerunners to the change in the identity of the sea again, as it returns full circle and becomes once again an adversary.
Amsterdam is a city that has limited space to house new constructions, so this project takes advantage of one of the main features of the city, the canals. The advantages of it are, besides not suffering from road congestions, the products can be delivered directly to the consumer and still have the advantage of being fresh. The dynamics of the city revolves around the canals, so why not use them for the benefits of its own population? The project exists only because of it. It can be considered as the beginning of a floating city. With the increase of water level, agriculture is threatened. The creation of this project also provides the preservation of this type of activity. The canals created in Amsterdam were properly designed to make the defense of the city, but also to ease the transportation and disposal of goods. The plan was made to improve the dynamics of the city, even if that meant that it was necessary to expropriate land and countless homes to remake the urban planning of the city. The project Botanic uses the canals for its exactly initial purpose, carriage of goods. In this case, fresh foods grown in a greenhouse, which is the boat. The project also have an educational program in which kids can visit the boat and learn how plants are grown and pollinate.
Links between Moses Project and Floating City Theory. Both the projects are a response to the rising sea level, with a different approach that generates a different identity for each. Both the projects protect a way of life, resolving the economy of the desired cities. The projects also tend to change the whole context of the cities. Understanding the cases, when looked into the history, it is found that apparently 600 years ago, Venice had diverted the major inflowing rivers of the lagoon to protect its people against the attacks from the northern part of the world. Similarly, 600 years later, Venice is defending itself from the rising sea level by creating a barrier between the tides to divert them away from the lagoon. In case of Amsterdam, it was founded by a few adventurers floating down the river Amstel. It was observed that by forging dams and dikes, a location was fixed on the land. When threatened by the rising sea levels, Amsterdam might free itself from the land and might start floating like the adventurers who found it. Hence, it is observed that both the cases are reapplying the history in the present, but in a newer form.
Earlier I mentioned Tausig's reference to Joseph Conrad's short novel The Heart of Darkness, and how it relates to the various identities of the sea. The novel has a couple of interesting relationships with the selected case studies. In the novel, the protagonist sails down the constricted river of the Congo. He floats on the rising and ebbing water, his iron ship removing him from the problems flowing beneath him. The water, however, is deceitful. It carries you deeper and deeper into the heart of the jungle, flowing one way only, and thus hindering return, tempting the protagonist with the promise of profit from new shores. A vein of easy trade, but hidden under the surface, are sharp rocks and shallows, that only the skilled may successfully navigate. The water is an enemy of the trade ship. It aids the exploited natives, and therefore must be defended against, as the Meuse project defends Venice. On the other hand, the ship accepts the water. The ship's entire identity stems from its relationship with the water. Similar to this idea, the floating city, as discussed in Amsterdam, does not resist the rising water level. Instead, it goes with the flow and rises with it.
Links between Venice and Amsterdam. Water is the major factor that ties both the cities together. They are also known as the cities of water. Both the cities are said to be amongst the few famous tourist attractions of the world. Amsterdam is also said to be the Venice of North. Amsterdam and Venice both have access to large water bodies, making them ideal centers of trade in Europe. How does the Moses Project and floating city theory link back to the texts? In the text, Tausig talks about his youth spent in Australian coast. There he explains how the barriers were placed for blocking the sharks from entering the city in order for the safety of the people living in it. Moses Project is almost a different recapitulation of the same. In the text, it was the sharks, whereas for the Moses Project, it's the rising sea level. Hence, it is observed that the objective is similar for both. If looked at Tafur's theme on development of the cities from the text, Venice must defend itself against the seawater as part of its city plan. It also envisions Venice as oasis in the water. Tausig explores the idea of sea as a backdrop and leisure background for the rich. The floating city will use the sea as a backdrop. Planning of the city influences the city in a micro and macro scale. Implications in the history of Venice and Amsterdam. Both the cities have developed around a major river that spread into minor canals. This system of water imitates the circulatory system in the human body, connecting various parts of the human body to one another. Both the cities accumulated massive wealth through their progressive trade industries. Both became multinational through trade. This wealth attracted the rich and noble from around the world, developing the cities as the centers of power. Both the cities developed a new personal culture from their unique stories.
Venice is a city frozen in time. Currently, there are no urban transformations occurring on it. The city is trying to preserve its history by doing it in such a radical way that all the citizens are suffering directly from the high tides. This will lead to a population change as citizens move away from escaping from the floating and the destructive tourism that tends to grow. On the other hand, Amsterdam is expanding the city into the water, not restricting themselves to land, which gives a new perspective on the way people are living and especially the way people deal with tides and floods.
Photos for each of the proposals can be seen on slides 18 and 19. The final stage in the process is to look at the implications of the case studies in the futures of Venice and Amsterdam. To begin with, Amsterdam and the floating city idea. The feeling behind the floating city is one of acceptance, of realising the futility of fighting against omnipotent nature. I envisage Amsterdam taking this approach to the extreme. In plan, the city's urban fabric will slowly disintegrate into a collection of small, floating and interconnected islands that embrace the rising sea levels. Venice, however, will go to the other extreme. I liken its current state to a Motte and Bailey castle, capable of defence against a smaller enemy, as the Meuse project protects Venice against rising tides of up to 3 metres. However, as sea levels continue to rise further, and more extreme defences are needed, as the stone wall replaces the original timber wall of the Motte and Bailey castle. Thus, a perpetual fight against nature may result in Venice becoming an ancient city surrounded by towering walls, a sunken bastion in the Adriatic Sea, safeguarding and preserving the delicate architecture within. I feel the routes chosen by the city will reinvent the city's future global identity. Amsterdam will progress as a forward-thinking pioneer. Venice, however, will remain trapped by its own quality, frozen in time, and a symbol of humankind's accomplishments over nature.
Summary and arguments. The Moses project will increase the contamination of water in the canals. Should it work, the Moses project is ultimately a temporary solution. Sea levels will continue to increase uncontrollably and eventually rise higher than the maximum protective height of the barrier. The Moses project is hugely ambitious. It represents the vast power of humans to control the ecosystem around them, a design moving towards vast megastructures of imagined future cities. How would the floating islands be powered? On a large scale, a population requires a huge amount of energy. The floating city represents a powerful step forward into re engaging with the earth. They embrace the power of nature and instead of fighting it, they use apparent problems such as rising sea levels to their advantage.